look at the gameplay of the Resident Evil games, most of them are not that difficult. Sure, every now and then we come across a game like Resident Evil 3 Remake which has infernal difficulty, but overall the series isn't extremely difficult when it comes to the main story of the game. However, the trophies in each of these games are another story. And that's exactly what I want to focus on with this episode of Nerd Space. I want to take a good, hard look at the hardest trophies in the Resident Evil series. Before we go any further though, I just want to remind you guys that if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that like button. It really helps promote the video and it helps me beat that YouTube algorithm. Okay, so let's take a look at the topic again. There are 3 rules that we are following with this list. First, we're looking at the mainline entries. That includes every numbered entry, the remakes, Code Veronica, Resident Evil 0, and the Revelation games. The second rule is that I'm not including any multiplayer, DLC, or Mercenaries trophies. The third and final rule is simple, 1 trophy per game. This way we keep it interesting and keep from adding too many trophies from the same game. Okay, so with the rules out of the way, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and this is my top 10 hardest Resident Evil achievements and trophies. Let's get it. Number 10, take it to the max, Resident Evil 5. So there are 2 trophies on this list I feel like are more tedious than actually difficult. Take it to the max is one of them. Sure, the trophy itself isn't exactly the hardest trophy to unlock in Resident Evil 5, but it's definitely the one that takes the longest to get and the one that most gamers eventually give up on instead of going for that platinum. Resident Evil 5, just like the game before it, allows the players to upgrade weapons. Unlike Resident Evil 4 though, this time around you have a lot more options in terms of which weapons to use. For example, we had the TMP in Resident Evil 4 as the only automatic weapon outside of the bonus weapons. In Resident Evil 5, you get way more automatic weapons, AK-74, MP5, VZ-61. Yet there is one major downside to this. Capcom wanted to make us spend a lot of time grinding in Resident Evil 5, and they knew that the best way to do this was to motivate us to upgrade every single weapon in the game. Enter the Take It to the Max trophy. This trophy challenges the players to obtain every single weapon in the game, but then turn around and upgrade each of those weapons completely. While that might not seem that bad, the fact is that you'll need somewhere around $1.4 million worth of gold in order to pay for all the upgrades. Meaning you have to do a lot of grinding in order to get the platinum in this game so that each weapon is fully upgraded. Sure, there are a couple exploits available to help you achieve this. There was the egg glitch if you wanted to cheat the system, but my way of doing it was playing chapter 4-1 over and over again until I finally got enough money to upgrade my weapons completely. And let me tell you, if you go that route, then you'll pretty much have every single inch of those caves memorized by the time you get this trophy. Again, it's not a trophy that requires skill, just patience, and a lot of it. Number 9, Mad Skills, Resident Evil 6.
It was you? That's right. Chris? Better put a leash on that puppy. This is between me and him. Go ahead. Shoot. You have every right to. Just promise me you'll survive. The world depends on it.
Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?
Stop it!
Put your gun down, now!
Remember when I said there were 2 trophies on this list that were more tedious than difficult? Well, here's the second one, Mad Skills. The irony is front and center with this trophy, as it is another one that doesn't require much skill to unlock. You'll just need to be ready to replay the missions over and over again in order to unlock points. See, just like with the previous entry on this list, Mad Skills is all about grinding the game hard in order to fully upgrade all the skills in the game. This time though, you're grinding for skill points versus gold. Mad Skills takes it even farther, requiring the players to retrieve roughly about 1 million skill points to fully upgrade each skill. Only this time, you have to do it with a lesser game in my opinion. Yes, I know there are defenders of this game out there. and I respect that. But if you gave me the option to grind Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil 6, I would pick RE5 in a heartbeat. As I already said, you need about 1,000,000 skill points to complete this trophy, and the best method that I personally used was Jake's Chapter 4 method. However, even with that method, the most I could walk out with per replay of that segment was around 14k in skill points. Meaning, if I did the math correctly, it took me over 70 replays of the exact same segment to reach 1,000,000 skill points. Tedious, just not impossible. Just like with Take It to the Max in Resident Evil 5, the hardest part here is just patience. Again. Number 8, Minimalist, Resident Evil 4 Remake. I guess I want to start off by saying that there really are not that many difficult trophies in Resident Evil 4 Remake, and part of me actually wanted to include a different trophy from Resident Evil 4 Remake, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Resident Evil 4's hardest trophy to most people has got to be the Minimalist. This trophy forces the player to go back to the basics and rely solely on a handgun and a knife for most of the playthrough. Sure, there is a trophy that limits you from using any healing items throughout the entire game, but there are just a ton of things you can do to make that playthrough easier. But relying completely on just a handgun and a knife to beat the game is limited with the options at your disposal. Yeah, you can use the primal knife and even your personal favorite handgun in the game like the Red 9. And yeah, you can even do this challenge on an easier difficulty, but you'll find moments that really are a pain to deal with when you can only use your handgun or knife. I'm not saying that this trophy is extremely hard. I'm just saying that it is something that will give you a harder time than you might expect, so just be prepared. Still, Resident Evil 4 Remake isn't a difficult game, and as long as you learn the timing with the parry system, then you probably won't have too hard of a time unlocking this trophy, which is more than I can say for the rest of the entries on this list. Number 7, Universe's Best at Resident Evil Village.
What are you doing?
From this point on, we start looking at things that are actually a challenge versus just being a pain in the ass. And something that I got a lot of heat for on my hardest Resident Evil games list is the fact that I didn't include Village on that list thanks to the Village of Shadows difficulty. And to be fair, this is actually extremely hard and I totally understand the criticism, especially if you don't do it on New Game Plus with weapons upgraded, which is exactly why we find Universe's Best Stat cracking the list for most difficult trophies in Resident Evil. To unlock this trophy, you must complete Resident Evil Village on Village of Shadows mode, aka the hardest difficulty in the game. Granted, you are able to do this on New Game Plus, giving you access to all the bonus weapons and upgraded weapons from your first playthrough. And let me tell you, you're gonna need it.
You think you can take me on? Fine. This'll be my rule before I kill the bitch. Let's settle this. Man, a man.
Yeah, I don't think this is the hardest mode in any Resident Evil game. Sure, some of the boss fights like Heisenberg are a pain in the ass to deal with, but there are a significant amount of autosaves in Village of Shadows. This basically allows you to get more retries on the more difficult sections of the game. Add that to the fact that you can come into this game with a powerful bonus weapon or other fully upgraded weapons, and the challenge of obtaining this trophy isn't as difficult as some of the other entries on this list. However, it's definitely the hardest trophy in Resident Evil Village, and you're going to find yourself dying a lot in order to claim this prize. Number 6, Who's Your Daddy? Resident Evil 7.
Welcome to the family, son.
Wow, that felt kind of weird. Anyways, from one game's hardest difficulty mode to another, this time we take a look at Resident Evil 7's Madhouse mode. Who's Your Daddy trophy is Resident Evil 7's version of the universe's best dad trophy. Yet, personally, I find it a little harder. Both games ramp up the difficulty of the main story to a whole new level, but with Resident Evil 7, you find that they go above and beyond with some of the changes in Madhouse mode. Now, just like with Universe's Best Dad and Resident Evil Village, you are allowed to use bonus weapons, but in my opinion, that ruins the fun. Still, this does make the experience a lot more manageable. But what really makes Resident Evil 7's Madhouse mode more difficult than Resident Evil 8's Village of Shadows comes down to two factors. One, the lack of autosaves. While both games allow you to manually save while also featuring specific segments of the game with autosaves, Resident Evil 7 Madhouse mode limits the amount of autosaves by a lot. Not to mention, you are only given a short amount of cassette tapes for manual saves, making Resident Evil 7's Madhouse mode far more difficult to manage. However, the more exciting factor that makes Resident Evil 7's Madhouse mode more difficult than Village of Shadows is the amount of changes it makes to the game itself. I mean key items, enemy placements, hell, even some puzzles are changed to make the experience feel completely different.
Heck of a thing, ain't it? Sure shit beats the hell out of dying.
So just because you played through Resident Evil 7 once or twice before taking on Madhouse mode doesn't immediately make you an expert. It really is a whole new experience. Add that to the spike in difficulty and the lack of autosaves, and trying to unlock this trophy will probably prove to be one of the more difficult challenges in the Resident Evil series. Number 5, a small carbon footprint, Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Go, go, go! Claire! It's behind you! Don't stop!
Unless you're using a guide or following someone's notes, the difficult part about this trophy is that it requires you to learn the map and remember where important key items are located. A small carbon footprint is a unique trophy that challenges the players to take no more than 14,000 footsteps in a single playthrough of Resident Evil 2 Remake. That's from the very start to the very end of the game. Now, a trophy like this obviously gets easier with each playthrough of the game, but ultimately, it can be a real challenge if you're not familiar with the map. Making too many wrong turns or backtracking more than you need to can spell disaster when trying to complete this challenge. It's also something that requires the player to pay close attention and plan out their next steps. Literally, plan out their next steps. Not to mention, it's important to limit the amount of resources you are picking up so that you don't find yourself revisiting the inventory boxes too often. Actually, I would argue that combining the minimalist trophy with this one is not a bad idea, as it will help motivate you against using inventory boxes, which also helps you limit the amount of resources you pick up. And ultimately, it will save you a lot of steps. Still, this one cracks the list as the most difficult in Resident Evil 2 Remake for the mere fact that even if you're playing this on the easiest difficulty, not knowing the map well could cause you to make too many mistakes, which ultimately ends your chances at unlocking this trophy. It's a unique challenge that instead of focusing on difficult gameplay, it focuses on strategy, concentration, and how familiar you are with the game itself. Number 4, From Zero to Hero, Resident Evil 0.
It's gonna be dangerous from here on in. Why don't we cooperate?
Cooperate with you?
Listen, little girl, if you haven't noticed, there's some pretty freaked out things on this train. And I, for one, want to get out of here. I don't think we stand a chance doing it alone.
You expect me to trust you, a wanted felon? I don't need your help. I can handle this on my own. And don't call me little girl.
All right, Miss Do-It-Yourself. What should I call you?
The name is Rebecca Chambers, but that's Officer Chambers to you.
I've said this multiple times, but I truly believe that Resident Evil 0 is one of the hardest Resident Evil games. And as you would expect, playing on hard is extremely frustrating. Well, with the Zero to Hero trophy, players are challenged with beating the game on hard mode. There are a lot of factors that make this mode and achieving this trophy one of the more difficult challenges that you'll face in the series. The first thing that I want to point out is the use of bonus weapons. See other entries on this list like Madhouse in Resident Evil 7 or Village of Shadows in Resident Evil Village allow the player to use bonus weapons or fully upgraded weapons to complete this mode. Unfortunately, you don't get that benefit for your first playthrough of hard mode in Resident Evil 0. See, each unlockable bonus weapon that you get in the game is locked behind a difficulty that you unlock that weapon in. So if you don't have a completed save file of hard mode, then you don't have those bonus weapons at your disposal. Another thing to note is that since this is a classic Resident Evil game, it means that there are no autosaves. You are limited to the amount of ink ribbons that you have available for saving. Then there's the mechanics of the game itself. Resident Evil 0 is unique to the series as it doesn't offer the famous magic inventory boxes. Instead, you have to leave items behind on the floor and come back for them when you need them. The big problem here is that it forces you to backtrack more and ultimately causes you more valuable resources. With all of these elements combined, it should be no surprise to see why this trophy is so difficult to unlock. Number 3, Jill Valentine, Resident Evil 3 Remake.
Look, just so you know, this is the last fucking time.
Resident Evil 3 Remake isn't that difficult of a game until you try out the hardest difficulty mode, Inferno. I've said this on a different list video, but Resident Evil 3 Remake's Inferno mode is one of the hardest modes in the entire series. Easily top 3 territory for me at the very least. Yet this trophy challenges you to go one step farther when completing this mode. The Jill Valentine trophy is one that challenges the player to not only beat Inferno mode, but to do so while also receiving an S rank. So what does this mean actually? Well, it means you have to do 2 different things. 1, you have to beat the game in under 2 hours. For the most part, this one isn't so bad as by the time you unlock Inferno mode, you have played through this game at least 2 other times minimum. It's when you add the other element to this challenge that helps skyrockets this trophy to the top 3 hardest trophies in the series. Limited saves. More specifically, for the player to get an S rank on Inferno, not only must you beat the time limit, but you are also limited to just 5 saves for the entire game. And in a mode that is far more difficult than most modes in the series where you'll easily find yourself making multiple mistakes, this is easier said than done. You might argue with me by saying, wait a minute, Ruben, you're able to use bonus weapons and coins. And to that, I would say, okay, that's fair. Except that despite having the use of bonus weapons, the game is still difficult, especially the boss fights. And don't even get me started with the final boss in the game on Inferno mode. By the way, I highly recommend saving one of your saves for the moment before taking on the final form of Nemesis, because regardless of what bonus weapons you use or how many coins you bring with you, I promise that you are going to die here a lot. Do not underestimate this mode and choose wisely in terms of when and where to save the game.
Next time, take the fucking hit!
Number 2, Ghost of a Chance, Resident Evil Remake. What if we took every single monster in the Spencer Mansion and then we made them all invisible? That's exactly what the Resident Evil 2002 remake does with the invisible enemy mode. Ghost of a Chance trophy challenges the player to beat the entire game on invisible enemy mode, which, as I just said, is exactly what it sounds like. Every single enemy you come across in the game is now invisible. Zombies, hunters, even boss encounters like the Yan are now invisible. On top of that, you can't rely on auto aim, as this feature is obviously removed from this mode. The only saving grace is that depending on the save file, you could do this mode on an easier difficulty. However, considering this mode is unlocked either by completing real survivor mode or completing Jill and Chris both on normal difficulty or higher, chances are that you'll more than likely take this challenge on either on normal or hard difficulty. How well do you think you know the Spencer Mansion? Well, hunting for this trophy will definitely test that knowledge. Number 1, Weapon Crazy, Resident Evil, Code Veronica.
Long time no see, Chris.
Wesker? He's still alive?
Number 1 on this list, of course, has to go to a trophy that is in the hardest game of the series, Code Veronica. On its own, Code Veronica is already the most difficult game in the series. It has one of the harder bonus modes with battle mode. It also has the hardest main game that doesn't even offer an easier difficulty setting. Multiple boss fights in this game are easily some of the more difficult boss fights in the entire series. The backtracking and limited resources is at an all-time high compared to any other Resident Evil game. I can go on and on about the fact that this game is no joke and that it takes a true Resident Evil veteran to complete this game. And that's before we even take a look at the platinum. So most of the trophies can be earned just by completing the main game, which, as I already said, is already a difficult task on its own. However, there are a few hard challenges for the player to face. Honestly, if I include more than 1 trophy per game, there is an argument to 2 or 3 trophies making this list from this game alone. But ultimately, there was 1 trophy that took the cake for the most difficult challenge in Resident Evil Code Veronica. The Weapon Crazy trophy, which is a perfect name because it will drive you insane. This trophy challenged the players to get an A rank in the main game. What does that mean specifically? Well, honestly, it's a lot. There's a whole score system, but I'll go over the major parts that's needed to just get an A rank. To get a high enough score to receive an A rank, you most likely need to do all of the following. Beat the game in under 4.5 hours, which is the most important element and factor here. Don't use any first aid sprays. Don't use any ink ribbons to save. Your only save that you can have is actually the halfway point after a boss fight on a helipad. And no retries. There are other things to consider that will add and subtract from your final score, but the factors above are going to be the most important rules to follow. Breaking 1 or more of these rules can easily cause you to fail your run and force you to start all over again. As you can imagine, in a game with so many instant kill enemies, you find yourself nervous as hell when dealing with the no ink ribbons rule, as just making a tiny mistake can end your playthrough immediately. Combine that with the feeling of being rushed because of the time rule and the fact that you are limited to using just herbs, puts enough stress on the player when taking on this ultimate Resident Evil challenge. But that does it for this episode of Nerds Based Games. Hit up the comments and let me know if you agree with my choice for the hardest trophy in Resident Evil. Is Weapon Crazy in Code Veronica really the hardest, or can you think of something else that should take the number 1 spot? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more ranking videos like this one, especially if you love Resident Evil and survival horror. But as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space. Take care.